Okay, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this January 15th, 2016 day on our calendar. I'm your host, Greg Anthony, and you're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. You can listen to my show every evening from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. That's Monday through Friday, Pacific Time, on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. They also play my show at 11 a.m. Pacific Time if you can't catch it in the evening. And if you can't catch any of those shows, go to my website at arcticbeacon.com, and you can catch all my shows as they're put on there a couple days after the fact. Well, sometimes everything is forgotten with time, and that's the sad part about this story that we do here with the Vatican, because for centuries they have been involved with genocide, torture, and we can go back to the Inquisition, we can go back to numerous genocides that we've talked about on this show. So I wanted to go back to 2006, 2007 to refresh your memory about the Vatican, the CIA, North American government officials, complicit in the torture and murder of more than 100,000 children, known as the Duplessis Orphans. It's called the crime of the century in Canada by a Holocaust victim. His wife was a victim, Rod Vanneau, who's been on my show many times, whose wife was a child victim who escaped. He added to me, he said the Vatican and CIA are still covering up the mass murder of these children and the grave sites. So let's think about what I talked about yesterday, how the Vatican and our government has painted Tony Alamo as a child abuser when in fact it is a bogus charge. He sits in jail for 175 years. But let's just compare this to the crimes that these people in the Vatican, through their Catholic orphanages, have committed, and how they are still allowed to come before Congress, this organization to come before the UN as the spiritual voice of the world. It is completely obvious that there is a cover-up, and these people's crimes are allowed to happen while others who talk against them are put in jail. So I wanted to refresh your memory about the story of the Duplessis Orphans in Canada, one that I covered 9 or 10 years ago, and had Rod Vanneau. He since wrote a book about it in French. French is his first language, from Montreal, and he speaks very well English, and you'll hear him today. I'm going to play excerpts from some of my old shows. I also interviewed journalist Christine Hahn, who had come out with this story in a magazine called Freedom Magazine, the end of 2005, beginning of 2006, and interviewed her, as well as I interviewed numerous of the orphans who have survived to tell this story, and their stories are incredible. Now, if we can't get justice for this, then something is very wrong. On March 15th, 2007, I wrote a story, and I said that Rod Vanneau and journalist Christine Hahn were just a couple of the thousands of people speaking out against the horrors that took place from the 1930s through the 1980s to a group of innocent children called the Duplessis Orphans. The name of the orphans originated from the former Premier of Quebec, Maurice Duplessis, who, according to Vanneau, was instrumental in protecting the culprits within the Canadian mental institutions, Catholic orphanages, CIA involvement, and covering up the torture and killing of thousands of these children. The despicable program, said Vanneau, was also part of a CIA mind experiment program, and we traced things like this going on in insane asylums in New York as well. It was an experimentation program carried out under the cover of darkness, but with full knowledge and complicity from the Vatican, who supplied the children through their orphanages. They knowingly provided these children from Catholic-run orphanages. And let me just add this. What they would do, the children in these orphanages, the nuns would write down that they were mentally incapable or insane for no reason when they weren't, so they could be transferred into these insane asylums and become guinea pigs in this CIA experimental program. They were complicit, lying that these children, innocent children, were considered insane. And so Vanneau told me, there was a quote, he said, I've written hundreds of letters to every imaginable higher official in the Vatican, in the Canadian government, in the U.S. government, because his wife, he found out years after being married to her, she was so embarrassed not to say anything, that she was one of the Duplessis Orphans who managed to escape at a young age. This, to me, was equivalent to the Canadian Holocaust, but everyone in the Vatican, in North American governments, and in the media is covering it up, still to this day. Vanneau has been an activist for his wife's cause, as well as an estimated 3,000 orphan survivors who are now reaching middle or old age. And way back then, I had him on my show many times. He talked plainly, starkly graphic, in horrific terms, telling that sad story of how thousands of children have been murdered and tortured as Vatican government officials turned a blind eye. You know, one victim who is now speaking out talked about how his job, and I interviewed this gentleman, how his job in the mental institution was to carry out the bodies of the dead children, throwing them like animals in a mass grave they called the pigsty. Adding the name of the mass grave acquired its name because it was right next to a pig farm. We estimate thousands of children were buried there on an 800 plot of ground in Montreal, where one of the mental institutions and orphanage was located. Now listen to this, what Rod said. When the land was sold by the Catholic Church for other purposes, including a parking lot and an expanded city highway system, workers accidentally dug up human bones. Now what they did is, in this place where they buried all these children, they covered it over with a parking lot, a governmental parking lot. And these workers accidentally dug up human bones. This find was then covered up by the government, who now own the property, saying the bones were those of animals. But the workers told the true story because it's hard to mistake a finger, arm, and leg bone, which were clearly human. Now, to me, this crime, this horrendous act, is enough to shut down every church run by this Vatican organization in the world, but it's not, because they are protected by the government officials who work with them. Now, Vanneau, for 15 long years, has been trying to get justice, and it's probably now 25 years, for this horrendous crime committed against his wife and others. And it's been a long, hard battle, and I followed it very closely and used to talk to Rod privately many times about this. A fight that looks like David Goliath versus the U.S. and the Canadian governments are battling him tooth and nail. Listen, the harassment he got for this was incredible, but he kept going. And the reason for the government barricade at revealing the truth is Vanneau's case opens up a really big can of worms, folks, exposing the government and the Vatican sanctioned torture and abuse of more than 100,000 children involved in illegal psychiatric government-sanctioned experimental programs. Now, this is allowed. Has there been any criminal cases brought against these people? No. But yet, we sit by, Americans, and watch the Alamo Ministry children being taken away by our government when there was no abuse found. And let me emphasize, no abuse. Now, Vanneau's wife, Clarina, was one of the thousands of children experimented on during the 1950s and 60s in what was known as this Duplessis Orphan case. She now is seeking justice for crimes including illegal mind-altering drug experimentation, physical beatings, torture with whips and chains, while being collared like a dog, ice-cold baths, sleep deprivation, and other crimes that basically shock the conscience. It is totally incredible. But yet, this organization is protected. Clarina's case has resurfaced by the hard work of an independent freelance journalist. She started this story, and I had the opportunity to meet her and have her on my show, Christine Hahn, who has spent 2 years of her life working with Vanneau and other victims like him, trying to document and bring to justice these high-level officials and doctors, and these CIA officials who were responsible for the horrendous child abuse involving thousands of children. Now, after all these years, said Vanneau, of trying to get justice, I know for a fact the Vatican is involved, and they have much, much power. When I sent a letter to Pope John Paul II, I believe it was intercepted by Ratzinger at the time, who is now Pope Benedict XVI. Nothing has ever been done, and if the Vatican is a good and holy place, why haven't they denounced the actions of the culprits involved? Our investigations, said Vanneau, have found that more than 200,000 children, mostly from broken homes without family attention, have been sold for money on the black market and shipped out, some in cardboard boxes, on ocean-going vessels headed for foreign ports. Vanneau added this about his wife's personal tragedy in a previous show I did. He said, "We have been married for more than 40 years, but Clarina kept secret she was one of the Duplessis Orphans until 1992, said Vanneau. She came from a poor family and was turned over to a Catholic orphanage when she was 9 years old. Since we began researching her case, we found overnight her medical files were changed, and she was declared mentally ill for no reason by the nuns. At the age of 11, she was then transferred to a psychiatric clinic where she underwent torture and abuse until she was 17, when she finally escaped. Her sister also was one of the Duplessis orphans, undergoing the same torture and abuse. But my wife and sister may have been one of the lucky ones. Over the years, even though the case has been sealed tight and we haven't been able to find an attorney willing to stand up against the government, information has surfaced that thousands of children were killed during the illegal experimentation program. In fact, there's a place near one of the psychiatric institutes next to the pig pen where investigators claim more than 2,000 children have been buried in a mass grave. There is a move now to try and exhume the bodies, but no court in the land wants to touch this case. Now, Vanneau's fight for justice is a stark example, folks. And the reason I'm bringing this story up is because isn't it true that in time we forget? Well, I hope you never forget what I'm saying today. Because Vanneau's fight for justice is a stark example of how officials in Canada, the U.S., and the Vatican have joined together with large drug companies to keep the truth from the public. For his efforts to vindicate his wife's name as well as prevent further child experimentation, Vanneau has had his phone wiretapped, as well as being harassed and followed by the Canadian authorities. The reason for the crackdown on Vanneau is that Hahn's investigation into the horrendous crimes committed against Clarina and others can be traced to illegal CIA-funded mind control and drug experimentation programs performed by unscrupulous doctors, some with former Nazi Party affiliations, essentially using the children as guinea pigs. Hahn said that since the ties go to high-level doctors and government officials in both countries, there has been a concerted effort to suppress her story as well as people like Vanneau who are trying to get at the truth. Although meticulously researched and documented, this investigative piece was rejected by all mainstream publications, as she had to settle for a publication in the alternative outlet called Freedom Magazine. And she also, folks, was on my show many times. I gave her a forum when many wouldn't. Recently, Vanneau outlined what his main motives are in seeking justice for his wife and the many other children abused by illegal experimentation programs. He said this, and listen good. Criminal acts, horrific criminal acts, were done to thousands of innocent children here on Canadian soil, ranging from murders, tortures, disappearance of children, lobotomies, and experimental drugs, and falsely labeling thousands of innocent young children from 1935 to 1975 as insane, and nobody has yet been held accountable for these criminal acts done to these Duplessis orphans. No one in the Vatican, no one in the governments, no one. Thousands of orphans were falsely labeled mentally ill. And today, folks, he said, this label still hangs heavy on the orphans' shoulders. They've never even removed this from their records. This label has not yet been erased. This alone is a criminal act. Think about it, folks. How would you like to go to get a job and they find out in your records that you're mentally ill? You think you're going to get hired? The Quebec government, the College of Physicians of Quebec, the Roman Catholic Church of Quebec, the Quebec Public Trustee, Guardianship, and the federal government of Canada have not yet acknowledged the harm done to the thousands of young children here in Quebec, not to mention the ones that have been killed. Constitutional rights. The Quebec government took away the Duplessis orphans' rights to defend themselves in a court of law since 1995. All through 4 members of parliament stated that the orphans could take a lawyer at any time for their case, but it has been 11 years now and that many orphans have been trying to get a lawyer for their case, but none available. Lawyer Daniel Leiter told me flatly that the Duplessis orphans case is locked shut tight for over 15 years. The Duplessis orphans have no constitutional rights, he said. It all boils down to a huge cover-up. The Duplessis orphans are entitled to a real compensation from all parties mentioned, not to mention that there should be criminal charges brought. There is no statute of limitations to murder. Mentioned for the lives ruined, still having to live today with the after effects of their horrific journey. You know, there's so many stories that I put on my website during this time, and let me just read some of the headlines. I said, mass graves of children found in Montreal. Another Duplessis orphan tells of being tortured as a child in CIA experimentation programs using Nazi doctors. Pierre Sampson, who I'll play a little clip of him in the second half hour, at that time he was 60, so he's about 70 now. He's calling for justice to stop murder of innocent children in government-sponsored programs like this. More than 50,000 children said to be illegally experimented, he said, but crooked officials on both sides of the border blocking the investigation. Now, I did that story and talked to actually not only Pierre Sampson, who was one of the members tortured, but also to one of the people that his job was to actually take these children out and throw them in a grave. That was his job. Now, when we look at this, Sampson said that thousands of children have died. He said there's about 3,000 surviving members. And what he even said is it's even going on as we speak now in places that we have no idea. And he's found out that this is going on in other places. And we, along with people I had on my show, found out there were hospitals in New York doing this. And recently a Canadian High Court in 2004 awarded damages to adult mind control victims in a related case, pinning the CIA with responsibility as well as their unscrupulous doctor, including a Dr. Ewan Cameron. Further look at Cameron's nefarious activities, a book called The Most Dangerous Game, traces the history of top-secret CIA mind control operations. And folks, the reason this was held in Canada was because under the radar. It felt it was under the radar there. And so they allowed this to go through the Vatican Church, then into these insane asylums there. And it was sponsored with Western money, CIA money. And in this book, The Dangerous Game, and talking about this Ewan Cameron, it traces the history of top-secret CIA mind control operations. We've heard of MKUltra, from the covert importation of Nazi doctors at the end of World War II, to the illegal brainwashing experiments conducted on the patients of psychiatric researcher Dr. Cameron. The same type of testing Cameron and others performed on adults is now being traced to innocent children as advocates for the Duplessis Orphans contend their evil knows no age limits. Regarding Sampson's personal story, he said at the age of 6 he was transferred from a Catholic orphanage to a mental institution, even though he was both mentally and physically sound, as church and civil authorities overnight changed his paperwork, indicating he was mentally ill. He had no family. That's why they took these orphans. Do you know? They had no family left. No one could come to their rescue. After researching what happened, said Sampson, who also appeared this week, that was years ago on my show, the church made a deal with the government to turn over perfectly healthy children in return for money, giving the doctors the ability to experiment at will, since we were all considered insane. I remember him saying that to me. To this day, he said, my records haven't been changed. Although I have never been mentally ill, my records still call me mentally ill. The link Sampson makes between infiltrated Catholic Church and the corrupted civil authorities is very disturbing, indicating a consolidation of corruption not only in government, but extending all the way to Rome and beyond. According to Vanneau and Sampson, this inhumane treatment was accomplished with the full authority, cooperation, and funding of the American and Canadian governments, together with corrupted elements of the church, one of the government's main suppliers of children, used like experimental guinea pigs. And I remember him saying this. Rod said, I hope one day we can get justice and remove this evil element of people from the continent. Now, I guess what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back to my old files, and I'll probably give Rod Vanneau a call next week, and maybe have him on the show and talk about his book. I know it was in French. I'm not sure if he got it. He was asking me to find somebody to translate it into English, and then we lost contact, but maybe I'll call Rod and do a follow-up. But how can we live, he says, in a society and trust a government who is killing our children? These people will never admit to what they've done, and the only thing we can do is gather enough support among good people to have these corrupted leaders removed. Vanneau also outlined what his main motives are in seeking justice for his wife, Sampson, and many other children abused by this illegal experimental program. And I remember him saying this. It's because horrified criminal acts were done to thousands of innocent children here on Canadian soil, ranging from murders, tortures, disappearance of children, lobotomies, and experimental drugs, and falsely labeling thousands of innocent young children from 1935 to 75, and even today. And nobody has yet been held accountable for these criminal acts done to these children. Boy, what strong words those are. Falsely labeled mentally ill and this label still hangs heavy on their shoulders. So folks, think about this. Think about this story for a minute. I'm going to play a couple clips from, I think, from Rod Vanneau, who was on my show, and also from Pierre Sampson, just so you can listen to them, how they talked 10 years ago. But relate this to what's going on with the Tony Alamo story, and you're going to see the double standard we have created, and also how we allow innocent people to go to jail while these criminals walk the streets and are honored. It is really incredible. And the reason I'm doing this story is, like I said, there's one point. Time, we forget everything, don't we? And that's why I trumpet this Tony Alamo story all the time. I don't want you to forget, and I don't want you to forget this story. And I think it's good that I bring it back to you. And hopefully, someday it'll be a better place. We'll be back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal after these messages.
Hear it first on FirstAmendmentRadio.com and FirstAmendmentRadio.net.
Okay, we're back on the second half hour of the Investigative Journal on this January 15th, 2016 day on our calendar. And I'm your host, Greg Anthony, and we're going over the Duplessis Orphan story, and for good reason. I said earlier that the reason I'm doing it is because we're so quick to forget. And when I interviewed Christine Hahn, who had worked on this story meticulously during year 2005, she had this printed in Freedom Magazine, had a difficult time getting it printed. But in that, I excerpted a part of the story and want to read that to you before I play some clips with Rod Vanneau and Pierre Sampson that I did back in 2006 in, I believe, April. So let's go back. And she said, children's advocate Carol Ruths, author of A Nation Betrayed, told Freedom that based on her research, the Duplessis Orphans became prime subjects for psychiatric testing and abuse. These children, she said, were defenseless, easy prey for ruthless doctors who inflicted pain and death under the guise of science. Many boys and girls, she said, had no parents to return home to. Hence, the extent of their abuse needed no cover-up. Who would tell? They could be beaten or drugged into submission. Orphans at Saint-Jean-de-Dieu were selected to receive electroshock, drugs, and other treatments, primarily based on whether or not they had immediate family members who might come to their defense or protection, and that was from one source who worked at that facility. Rod Vanneau said Quebec psychiatrists viewed these children, who most often came from the province's poorest families, as unwanted. They emptied Quebec's orphanages, sending the unwanted children to the psychiatric hospitals where psychiatrists could do any experiment that they wanted to do on these over 100,000 children, and no one would know. Evidence, he said, suggests that many boys and girls became victims of a psychiatric eugenics program with connections to prominent members of the U.S. and Canadian psychiatric establishments. Defectives was the sweeping label that Canadian psychiatrist Charles Clark, founder of the Canadian Mental Health Association, applied to immigrants from Eastern and Central Europe. Another Canadian eugenist, Helen McMurky, a provincial inspector of the feeble-minded, campaigned for sterilization to prevent certain mothers from filling the cradle with degenerate babies. Freedom addressed this subject in the 1996 cover report. Yes, it did, and it's Canadian. I wonder where Freedom magazine is today. In its Canadian edition entitled The Ethnic Cleansing of the Mentally Unfit. Sterilization in Canada, the authors wrote, the tools of the eugenics thus became immigration controls, birth control, sterilization, and finally euthanasia, as carried out by the Nazis, noting that the first three methods had been employed in Canada, resulting in, among other things, the involuntary sterilization of thousands of women, many of them Canadian, Indian, and other minorities. With fresh allegations now surfacing that many Duplessis orphans died or disappeared, the fourth item on the eugenics agenda, euthanasia, certainly warrants official investigation. Hahn's story then went on to charge that hundreds, thousands of innocent children were eventually killed during these horrific experimentations. Indeed, The bodies of even thousands of these Duplessis orphans buried near Quebec psychiatric hospitals may today hold the key to documenting what really happened to these people and the organized psychiatric genocide that took place. Montreal attorney Daniel Leiter suggested that Quebec's officials permit exhumation of bodies buried on hospital grounds to determine to what extent orphans may have been used for psychiatric experimentation, including lobotomies, electroshock, and mass drugging. I promised to play a clip, and this is from, I believe, April 12, 2006, one of my interviews with Rod Vanneau and Pierre Sampson. So let's listen to what they had to say. Guests, Pierre Sampson and Rod Vanneau, have one thing in common, a story called the Duplessis Orphans. For those of you not familiar with this story, we've had Rod on before, and he talked about how his wife was abused in this mind control program when she was a child. Let me explain this to you. This is a story of huge proportions, a story that's been covered up, a story that goes on both sides of the border. In fact, was used more in Canada, though, because it was a little less under the radar screen. It started back in the 50s, and the program came to light when there was a recent case in Canada, and a Dr. Cameron was involved in this case, where the CIA was pinned with funding projects to have mind control drug experiments done on adults. And a number of adults came forward, and the courts agreed that this program went on, and it went on through government funding from both Canada, the United States, and through these unscrupulous doctors who worked on these adults, using them as victims. Well, the story grew, and they now found through this Duplessis Orphan story that thousands of children were used as victims. The same program, but with children. Thousands of them. And I have one of the Duplessis Orphans with me, Pierre Sampson, today. Rod Vanneau is back. And the reason I had Rod back is Pierre Sampson's story is very personal. Rod provides an overview because he's been researching this for 10 years of where the case sits right now to get justice for these orphans. Because basically what happened was, through mainly Catholic orphanages, children were taken out, put into insane asylums, and immediately overnight considered insane, so that doctors could work on them. I mean, work on them in incredible things that my guest, Pierre Sampson, will tell us about. Pierre, how are you today?
Doing okay, thanks.
Okay, I introduced you as one of the Duplessis Orphans, and this name has come to be known to a group of people who were involved in these programs, thousands of them, some children who didn't make it and are now even in a mass grave in Canada. Tell us how, you were in the orphanage at the age of 6. We don't need to get into how you got there. You were orphaned, put in a Catholic orphanage, and then immediately overnight you found yourself in an insane asylum, and you're perfectly healthy. Tell us how this occurred.
From what I understand is that the religious order needed some extra funding from the federal government and whatnot, and so in conjunction with the Maurice Duplessis, the Premier of Quebec at the time, they reached an agreement whereby they would reclassify orphanage as psychiatric asylums. And the nuns at the time, I was at Mont-Providence, and they basically labeled a lot of children as mental retard. And once they do that, then you lose all your rights.
Right.
Yeah, it was quite the thing. That's basically for the sake of money and power, I guess. I'm not too sure.
And let me go. We're going to get to your personal story. Rod Vanneau, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Hi, Rod. How are you today?
Not too bad, great. Not too bad. I got a bad cold.
Okay, I heard you coughing there in the background. That's okay. Feel free to do it at any time.
Okay.
I just, in the last 2 minutes before the break, just tell us a little bit about an overview. How many children are involved, like Pierre Sampson? I know your wife was a Duplessis orphan. Tell us basically what you found out in the 10 years of research. If you could recap it in a short minute or two, and then we'll get
there must be about, Greg, 3,000 at least survivors, you know? And like my wife, and like Pierre Sampson, there's so many survivors, these victims here. There's a lot of suffering, and we know, like the American Psychiatric Association and the American College of Surgeons, the CIA. We have documentation. They've been here in Quebec in our hospital since 1922. And just lately now, and they were picking up the kids, all the orphans, thousands and thousands, and so many thousands and thousands that we don't even know where these kids are, And we've got some mass grave sites here in Quebec that needs to be dug up, and forensic science, done on these mass graves. And right now, we just found out here, just lately, I found out this here, like Plattsburgh, New York. So, Ewan Cameron lived in Lake Placid, New York.
And he was the doctor involved in some of these experiments.
Yeah, right. And also, we have a doctor. We've got him recorded. He's staying in Florida. And he testified just about 3 months ago on a recording that Ewan Cameron and Dr. Heinz Lehman from the Douglas Hospital both used to go to St. Jean de Dieu Hospital. And they've done experiments there on the Duplessis Orphans. And this hospital here, where Pierre Saint-Jean was at the Mont Providence, this belonged to the same organization, the same institution, see. And now we know, like in Plattsburgh, New York, because there were so many of our children that were transferred across the border to New York. So we don't know if it was New York City but now, Plattsburgh is an Air Force base there, and there's a link between Ewan Cameron, and there's an 18-foot level there under the Air Force base. I don't know if it's still there, but they were doing experiments there,
Okay, listen, we're going to take a break, and then we'll come back with Pierre Sampson's story in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
Okay, we took a break on that show back in 2006. So let's get back to Pierre Sampson and Rod Vineau regarding the Duplessis Orphans.
Sampson, we were going to get right into your story about how you were orphaned and then how basically overnight you were declared insane, put in an insane asylum. There was no reason for it. You're a very sane person even to this day to be categorized that as a crime in itself. But tell us about what you underwent for those 8 years in this, I don't know other way to say it, just a hellhole.
Hellhole?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I must have made them learn that the nuns matter something at the orphanage. And at the time, there were supposed to be psychiatrists that would evaluate you and declare you either sane or mentally retarded or whatever. But the nuns went overboard, and then if you got them mad, they just signed down that like you're hyperactive, you show signs of mental retardation, so they just labeled you mental retard. And at that point, they ship you up to St. Jean de Dieu. And as you know, as a mental retard, you lose all your human rights. You have no right of appeal. You have no voice. Whatever you say is useless because you're a mental retard. Who's going to believe you?
Okay. So they send you to this. What was
in St. Jean de Dieu, the psychiatric hospital.
Okay.
Dr. Cameron, I was subjected to electroshocks for experiments. I was chemically sterilized at the age of 10. I've been in straitjackets. I've been isolated in padded cells, if you will, for months on end, tied down, strapped down to a bed, no mattress, and
can you hear me right now?
And we had no emotional contact, no social contacts, because in the hospital, the one side was for the woman and the other side was for the man. And this is a 5,000-bed hospital at the time. And we had no interaction with any kind of social interaction, no education.
I was going to ask you, now you said that you underwent electroshock therapy?
Yeah. I don't know why they did it, but they, I pleaded with them. I asked them not to, I was crying. I was just a kid, 10, and something like that. And then, please don't. And the guy just looked and just pushed the button anyhow. And then also the nuns at the hospital, if you got them mad too much, they were certified nurses themselves. So sometimes you get electroshock as punishment. They figure, okay, well, we'll zap you, and then that'll be it for that.
Now, what about any kind of drugs? Did you submit to any kind of drug testing?
LSD 25, chlorpromazine. I remember that one. I don't remember too much myself. I just I had to escape from there, so I tried to escape a few times, and so I'd have to dump the pills. I never really got to know all the names of them, but some of them would knock you out within seconds. There was one there that used to give you in a syringe for controlling mental patients that were becoming violent. You know, they just inject you, and the guy, you know, you watch the guy just drop basically instantly. So I don't know what was in there, but it worked. They did what they call EEG, electroencephalogram test, after the electroshocks. I don't know to see what they did to my brain. I don't know how much of my brain has been destroyed because of that.
And there was no time where you were ever ill?
No, because I was perfectly normal. I was just a normal kid, you know, and basically I ended up in there because I guess my mom couldn't be bothered to raise me. I guess I was in the way, so I got placed.
So then, how many kids were with you in that facility?
Oh, boy. They have 10, 20, 30 wards. In my ward alone, the St. George ward, there was like about 70, I guess. 70, 80 kids.
And this testing was going on with all the children there, correct?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of things. Some of them, they'd have holes in their foreheads and stuff like that from Cameron drilling in their brains. Cameron used to do that, you know, just to go in there and cut part of the brain to see what the reaction would be. And so, you know, it's...
you know, if just to our listeners, just to recap, this is Pierre Sampson. He spent 8 years in a insane asylum. He was illegally put in there as a child and then experimented upon with money funded by both the United States and the Canadian government's CIA program. This is documented by my other guest, Rod Vineau, whose wife experienced the same thing that Pierre Sampson experienced. And Rod came on the show a couple of months ago to talk about this. Rod, you listened to Pierre, and it must bring back memories of what your wife told you.
Yeah, it's about the same. You know, on the girls, she was in a girl institution, and she spoke about Largetil, which is chlorpromazine. Thorazine in the States, and it's a weird thing right now. I got my eyes on the television, and there's a doctor who is the doctor of the College of Surgeons here. He is the president, and he was insane on the job because Pierre must know him, and he was working in the laboratory. His name is Dr. Yves Lamontagne. And he's right now on TV. They're talking. I don't know what he's talking about, but I can see this guy here. And he's one of the guys. What Pierre was saying, yeah, there was a lot of electroshocks and massive drug. All the kids, you know, they would inject them with any kind of stuff, anything that there was. They were doing experiments with.
And I know
with the poor children. You know?
Right. And I was talking to Pierre. I know he's trying any way possible to get some kind of justice in this case, which is very difficult. I know you have too, Rod. What's a real... Christine Hahn, a journalist I had on the show regarding this story, is one of the few that's been working on this story, trying to get it out. She's told how difficult it is to crack the mainstream media in both our country and your country.
Well, it's a huge cover-up, and Christine and I, we've been working together for the past 5 years now. And this case has to crack. It has to, you know, this cover-up here, it's got to stop. And right now I'm waiting for my letter from the Premier of Canada. Yeah, I had written to the Queen. I had written to the Governor-General of Canada. And the Governor-General of Canada, Michaëlle Jean, she just wrote to me, and I received this about 15 days ago. And she sent her recommendations to the Premier of Canada, Stephen Harper. And I should get some news on that side. I don't know what action he will be taking in this here.
I know it's been difficult for you. I mean, people have tried to stop you from telling your story. No one wants to admit that this goes on in our government, although you have documentation, correct?
Right. Yeah, it's all documented. We've got so much evidence, so much proof. And just one thing in all of this here, all their files, they're all labeled mentally retarded. It's in the file.
Yeah, still.
And these poor people, you know, they're still carrying this on their shoulders, Greg.
Yeah.
You know?
And I wanted to get back to Pierre and ask him first, How did you finally get out? I mean, I know you tried to escape a number of times, but tell us how this story went, and then we'll move the story forward. Go ahead.
The last time I escaped about a dozen times in the last 4 years that I was there, and the last time, previous to the last time that I got out of there, I met this kid. His name was Bobby Duplessis, and he took me home to his parents after I told him what was going on with me, and then he says, well, you got to tell this to my mom and dad. So I went over there, and they kept me at their house for about a week and a half. Naturally, the cops were looking for me and everything else, but and they got to know, they checked my story out and stuff like that, and they came back and they coached me, and then finally I did get back. Bobby came home from about a week and a half after he come home, running home early from school, and I went home at his house, at his parents' house. I was just like 13 years old myself. I'm not going out because, if I go out, I'm going to get caught. So Bobby came home and he says, you got to get out, man, because the cops, they know you're here. They're going to come and get you. So I went away from there. You told me that you started trying to escape at the age of 10 and always would get caught. And what would happen to you when you would go back? When you tell them, look, I'm not ill, I'm not insane. Oh, I did. I told, like the police taking me back, I pleaded with them. I told them about the abuses. I told them about the drugs. But the thing is that when you're labeled a mental retard, whatever you say has no value. It's unfortunate, but even today I'll be 60 years old and I'm still labeled, so whatever I say has no value. So, according to Canadian law, anyhow. Yeah, according to, we'll just forget about that and throw those laws out the window, because what you do say here has value. It has value for one reason and many reasons, but the major reason is that, one, your human rights, civil rights, every type of right known to God and man have been violated by a corrupt government who has performed. Basically, let's put it this way. You were used as a guinea pig in experiments that were illegal. The government is refusing to admit it, and they need to be brought down to, we need to get justice for you and to prevent this from happening to any children. Yes, I mean, this could thousands and thousands, many dead. Rod, could you just tell us in this we got a couple minutes here before the break and then another segment, but can you tell us about this one grave site you uncovered? I mean, how horrendous can a story get? Okay, well, just before, I just want to say thank you to you and your station, okay, for giving us voice, and to Pierre and to all the other victims. Well, what other story is more... And go ahead. And about the cemetery. Yeah, this grave site here is in Montreal. And we have, this is documented, we have at least 2,167 kids that are in what is called the Pigsty Cemetery. And this cemetery was just next to a hog farm. And it's a massive grave, and this got to be dug up because there's so many children. That was the 4 hours there, too. It is unbelievable. And these are the kids that were in the same places that your wife and Pierre were in, right? Yes, sir. Well, from the hospital, from Saint-Jean-de-Dieu, you could look across the fence and across the road and everything, and you could see the other part of the hospital. Like, there's another huge building by itself. And there was rumors in the Saint-Jean-de-Dieu that once you were transferred there, that was it. She would never be seen again.
Okay, so we went on for another 10, 15 minutes. You get the point. I'll come back and have some comments on this program Monday. So check it out yourself. Check out Duplessis Orphans. Google it. Back after the weekend. Have a good evening.